Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached a portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty. It is self-explanatory, and let's bring right in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, the man with the longest title in the world. But we prefer to call him our guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, big dust up over the Supreme Court and their refusal to grant an emergency stay, giving Democrats a big victory in Pennsylvania in extending the time in which mail-in ballots can be accepted to 3 days after the election. So my basic question to you, is this constitutional? And is it in concert with Pennsylvania state law as written?
Well, the second question is much easier to answer, and it's no. Pennsylvania law requires that ballots, whether absentee or cast in person, be cast or received by the election boards on election day. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court was the judge in a lawsuit brought by Democrats in the state who argued that other provisions of the Pennsylvania Constitution were not met with that part of the law. So that people basically have the opportunity to cast their vote freely is part of the Pennsylvania Constitution. Democrats were able to successfully argue to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that they were not, that because of the COVID pandemic and the restrictions placed upon people, that wasn't being honored. And then one of the ways to remedy that was to extend the deadline. I want to add, Tim, that Pennsylvania Supreme Court has partisan elections for its justices. So justices for that court, they run as a Democrat, typically, or a Republican. And I think it's a 5-2 split right now, Democrats versus Republicans on that court. I would also add to you that that court is the one that issued me my license to practice law. So I can't say too many bad things about it.
Well, that's about as far as you're evidently willing to go in criticizing the government of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But
let me. So just to the first question, you asked if it was constitutional, and you did quickly mention that this was they denied a request for a stay. So let's just be clear what this was. This was not a Supreme Court case that they had heard at the United States Supreme Court level. The United States Supreme Court got a request from Pennsylvania Republicans, an emergency request to stay that ruling so it wouldn't go into effect until the case could be heard. And they declined to do so, having tied 4-4, and Roberts aligning with the liberals and with the others, the conservatives, Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. They actually made sure that their names were known and published the fact that it was a 4-4 disagreement.
Now, come Monday, the composition of the Supreme Court is likely to be different because Amy Coney Barrett is almost certain to be confirmed to the Supreme Court on Monday, 8 days before the election. Is there any recourse for Republicans in Pennsylvania to come back with another challenge to this rule? And if not, what recourse would they have if they object to the tallying of all these mail-in ballots for the 72 hours after the election?
Tim, typically no, unless there's new facts. Now, because this is an election, there's lots of moving parts. There will be some new facts that Republicans can then think justify another bite at the apple to get to the court. Now, we'll see. There are people on the Supreme Court, Tim, who might like to rule one way in this case, but might not like that kind of gamesmanship of the process. These things have to develop as they do. One thing I can tell you is, though, that the remedy for something that hasn't yet occurred may be different than for one that has occurred. So those votes haven't been received yet by the election boards post-election day. Once the vote is cast and they do start coming in, depending on what's done with them, they may have good cause to go back to court. Again, as you say, if that court includes Amy Coney Barrett, and if our suppositions about her are true, she would join the other 4 to make sure that those polls were closed on election day, like Pennsylvania law clearly states. And I don't even think, Tim, that there was one argument by the other side that says that that's not clearly stated in the law. It's a workaround.
Well, if ever there was reason to believe that the addition of Amy Coney Barrett to the court is significant, this ruling, 4-4, certainly confirms it, because John Roberts, as has been his wont increasingly in recent years, sided with the leftists in what could be a crucial decision depending on what happens in the election.
I think that John Roberts would be the first person to tell you they're not Republican judges or Democrat judges. They're just judges.
That's right. He issued that retort to President Trump in an extraordinary public statement by a Chief Justice. He said there are no Obama judges or Trump judges. And of course, everybody laughed at it because we all know the difference in judicial philosophy and political and constitutional beliefs is crucial to the split in the court. Let's move on to a critical issue in light of Facebook and Twitter literally censoring a critical story from the New York Post, the fourth largest circulated newspaper in the country, about Hunter Biden and his emails and the connection to Joe Biden. And it's now reached critical mass almost in Congress, where they're citing Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act as potentially no longer being able to protect these large social media organizations. What is Section 230 and what's in jeopardy here?
Section 230 has to do with who is declared to be a publisher. And all it does is it grants immunity from being a publisher's status to certain tech companies. So, for instance, YouTube is a perfect example. It relies on user-generated content, the videos that people post on YouTube. If somebody posts a video on YouTube that is defamatory, which is to say they allege certain bad acts were committed by somebody else and that person didn't commit those bad acts. Now, it's one thing if there's sort of public figure exceptions to the law that I know you know, Tim. We won't bore everybody with that for right this second. Let's just say somebody went on a screed against their neighbor who built a fence behind their house that they didn't like, and so they invented a lot of lies about them, sort of a typical neighbory thing, right? Well, if they put that video on YouTube and YouTube allowed it to stay up, the neighbor could sue not just the person who uttered the lies, but YouTube for quote unquote publishing those lies. That would mean they are publisher status. Now, before Section 230 was passed, you could either be a publisher or not. And what we mean by that is there was no gray area where you could kind of delete some material or censor some material and not others. But what 230 allowed platforms to do was to say, well, we're going to remove anything that's like totally egregious. So YouTube won't perhaps allow pornography or actual depictions of certain crimes in progress. But for the allegation against the neighbor with the fence, they don't know whether that's true or not. They know that it could be allowed if it were true, and they just allow it to go forth. And it gives them immunity. So if that neighbor sues YouTube, they can say, boom, Section 230, we're immune from this suit. Well, the idea behind 230 was that it would allow voices to flourish, and that it wouldn't be used to repress ideas or advance others, but just allow all ideas to kind of flourish. And so Donald Trump in May instructed Ajit Pai, the federal communications chairman who is tasked in the law to kind of monitor Section 230 and articulate rules, to do just that. And we're waiting now, Tim, to see what rules they announce. And I expect there's going to be court fights over it no matter what the announcement is, and that also Twitter and other social media networks are going to become somewhat less dialed into the social justice warrior scene than they had been.
Let me ask you a common sense question as a civilian. If the definition of a publisher is a site that determines which content will go up and which will not, once they pull down something like the New York Post story, haven't they automatically become a publisher by exercising their judgment about what should be posted and what shouldn't?
Well, Section 230 does not explicitly say that if you do it for political judgment. It always envisioned that the quote unquote publisher, and I think we should use platform here to differentiate whether that platform is is legally defined as a publisher for defamation purposes, it doesn't say only for neutral purposes, but that's what was envisioned in the law with the intent, obviously. So the question is, can the intent be applied to the law? It sort of goes back to, I think, a discussion we had last week about judicial philosophies.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Scott Cosenza, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor.
Extra, read all about it.
Election 2020 Big Bottom Flash Reports are coming. On election night, at the bottom of every hour, LibertyNation.com will give you Election Night 2020, 90 seconds at a time, with our Big Bottom Flash Reports. You'll get the drop with our one-stop shop. Tune into LibertyNation.com on election night for our Big Bottom Flash Reports, at the bottom of every hour. LibertyNation.com.